Late in 2024, I published my first long-form scripted video discussing Sonic Unleashed and comparing the Wii version to the HD version on PlayStation 3. At the time, I was pretty happy with the way I articulated my core points, but recently, upon revisiting that video, I feel as though the video's conclusion distorted my overall point I was trying to make and resulted in a much more negative takeaway than what I had actually intended. As such, I feel it's necessary to go back and revisit the core points of that video and make a little clearer my actual feelings on the game, since I don't believe that the tone of that video accurately reflects how I felt about Sonic Unleashed then, nor how I feel about it now. But first, a little bit of context. That video was written, recorded, and edited very shortly after I had made my long play videos of the game, both the Wii and PS3 versions. Because of this, the more negative elements of the PS3 version especially stuck out to me. I found in general that when recording for long plays as opposed to just regular playthroughs for the purpose of editing down into shorter scripted videos, they tend to have greater time and performance pressures. Because of this, in order to preserve the video's watchability, having the most efficient path through the game from beginning to end is obviously of paramount importance. When it came to the Wii version, it was very easy. Do the missions and talk to whoever will advance the plot forward. Easy. But the PS3 version had hub worlds on top of missions and was overall much slower and therefore more time-consuming. I ran into audio glitches with the game, as it seems to be common with PS3 capture for whatever reason in my experience, making about 2 to 4 hours of footage completely unusable. These things amplified a sense of frustration with the game, and as a result, had me walking away from it feeling as though the hub worlds were totally pointless and the progression was needlessly bottlenecked by the nature of its design. I believe the context for the reason for playing through the game is the most important key. Perhaps if it wasn't being recorded for the sake of a long play and just for a retrospective or comparison video, then it would have been a better experience. I think back to my playthrough of The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom as my prime example of what I mean, where I was allowed to take my time and do whatever I felt without the pressure of doing exactly what was necessary beat for beat for the sake of a long play. The way long plays require you to interact with games is fundamentally different from Let's Plays or just casual playthroughs, since you must keep watchability in mind first and foremost. Coming from that mindset into an analysis of Sonic Unleashed, in this case then, was an error on my part. One thing I neglected to mention when talking about both versions of Sonic Unleashed is their replay value. Especially when it comes to the HD version, Sonic Unleashed has probably the most difficult S ranks in the entire series. They don't necessarily demand absolute perfection, however, the margin of error you're allowed even for the A rank is very narrow. Thanks to this, it makes the stages pretty much endlessly replayable. The replay value of the stages in Sonic Unleashed, especially the HD version, is so high, I honestly don't think any other game in the series can really match that except for Shadow's stages and Sonic X Shadow Generations, and maybe Sonic Adventure if you go for the speedrunning tricks. The replay value for the HD version, then, is practically unparalleled, even against the Wii version. I originally discovered this myself while I was recording S ranks for my Sonic X Shadow Generations video and running through Rooftop Run. It was there when I unlocked the true joy of perfecting my run through the stage to get that S rank by the end. It was already at that point, just a month or so after releasing that Sonic Unleashed video, that I realized that I had gone wrong in more than a few areas in that video. Of course, the joy of Sonic Unleashed doesn't only come from playing through its story. I knew that back then. But because I was so locked into the long play mindset, I couldn't help but to only look at the game from that angle. It's designed to be replayable. It's intended to have its stages constantly revisited, day and night stages. Overlooking this crucial aspect of the game was a pretty catastrophic error on my part. Speaking of the baked-in replayability of these stages, this feeds directly into my other chief issue with the game, as I stated in my original video, that being the collection of Sun and Moon medals. I mentioned that collecting the Sun and Moon medals in the daytime stages in particular is unreasonable given the way you are meant to interact with those stages. But upon applying more critical thinking to that idea, after realizing that these stages are designed to be replayed countless times, I think it's safe to assume that part of what comes with mastering these stages is some form of exploration. Additional routes within stages are so well hidden, and if you are boosting all the time and brute forcing yourself through the end of the level, not only will you still come out with a B rank, but you will also have likely found none of the Moon medals hidden throughout the stage. In this way, I think part of the discovery process to an eventual S rank for these stages not only comes from successful speedy navigation through the stages, but also charting out the different pathways through them, which can only really be achieved by slowing down. These stages are not built to be S-ranked on the first try. I believe, then, it is reasonable to assume that navigating these stages more slowly can also lead to the discovery of the Sun and Moon medals hidden throughout the stages inherently. It is my conclusion that because of this philosophy, even the Sun and Moon medals in the daytime stages, as they are implemented in the HD version, are just as reasonable as they are in the Wii version, with the only caveat being that you are required to revisit the stage many more times in the HD version. Progression through the game's story is tied to the number of Sun and Moon medals you collect, with your progression being halted in the event you attempt to enter a stage or area that requires more of each medal than you already possess. This issue is semi-multifaceted, but generally, after looking back at the game, its structure and story, it actually makes a lot more sense. Even in my own video, I mentioned how the game is a buddy globe-trotting adventure starring Sonic and Chip. They build a bond after experiencing the world, with Sonic introducing Chip to the world that he is destined to save after every 1,000 years cycle. By the story's end, you're meant to feel the bittersweetness of Sonic and Chip's parting, since Chip must return back to the planet's core with Dark Gaia and sleep until the cycle with Dark Gaia repeats itself after a millennia, and Sonic must be sent back to the surface to live out the rest of his life. These two are likely never to see each other again. So part of the way we are meant to understand this bond between them is by experiencing their world adventure. This is incentivized through the medal collecting aspect of the game. There are more than enough ways present in the game to collect these medals. You can find them in the hub worlds, of course, as well as in the stages, but also as thanks from the locals of every region by helping them through small side quests. Many of these side quests come with optional cutscenes between Sonic and Chip, including one which is apparently a parody of a similar scene in Kung Fu Panda. I'll be honest, I didn't realize that these side quests really existed as an option, and the self-restriction to grinding out the collection of the medals only in the action stages, particularly the night stages, my sense of the margin of medals you can choose to pursue or miss in every playthrough is actually a lot higher than I initially concluded them to be. I also suppose I could hide behind the cover of "this isn't an especially well-known fact." I can't help but to think that this is, at least to some degree, some form of mischaracterization of the game on my part. The point of this adventure is to take in the places, people, and their culture, and the pursuit of at least some of these side quests is inherent in the game's design. I'm surprised I didn't catch this before, but after having more experience with other games with similar implicit incentives for how to interact with them, I have no choice but to admit that my approach to the game, and therefore my appraisal, were wrong. There are some things I do stand by, particularly my issues, albeit small, when it comes to each game's control quirks. But one thing I want to clarify the most is that I have always been a fan of this game. From when I first played it as a kid on the Wii to my most recent playthrough, I feel as though that there is a lot more game here on offer than even I could have imagined. Especially when it came to the nature of the HD version of Sonic Unleashed, I greatly underestimated the depth to which the game's content reached. When the Japanese version is titled Sonic World Adventure, they weren't kidding. This is probably a greater adventure game than perhaps any other game before it, including Sonic Adventure or Sonic 06. I find myself especially liking the night stages, and I have always appreciated them for their slower and greater emphasis on combat and platforming, and despite some later stages giving me some problems in the HD version, I still can't help but to look back fondly at my experiences with those stages and seeing them as worth revisiting in the future. So yeah, it turns out I really haven't had my fill of this game quite yet. And while I always appreciated Sonic Unleashed, even when critical outlets were being negative towards it, upon further critical re-examination on my part of both the game and my own video, I've only grown to appreciate it even more. I think it's great, and I'm glad the game can now be enjoyed on PC thanks to the unofficial Sonic Unleashed recompiled port. I think that's what it's called. This game deserves its more positive reevaluation, and it has been due for a long time. And I'm glad to see it get what it has been so long overdue.